So today I'm very excited to introduce Ranch Steven. And some of you may know him as Plant Steven. Um, but he's really truly both Ranch and Plant Steven. And he originally came to Florida from Wisconsin. He got his Bachelor's of Science from the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point in 2020. And he has a long, varied experience doing different like plant ecological work. He worked in Boise, Idaho, and then he worked in Miami for about almost over 2 years, working for the USDA and growing fruit trees, I think. And yeah. And then we were lucky enough to get him to come to the ranch to work with us. And he has a lot of experience in fire, plant surveys, and he's just an all around good ecologist. And we really enjoyed having him at the ranch. And then Aaron stole him and took him to the plant lab, which I was very happy for Stephen because I know how much he loves plants. So I was kind of pleased about that. Steven's been at the ranch for almost a year now, and he is top of the leaderboard in INAT for observation when you combine both Buck Island Ranch and Archbold. So he's the one to beat, if any INAT enthusiasts out there. So I'm unmute to start speaking.
No, unmute.
Okay. So now I'm happy to introduce Stephen and let him take it over from here. His presentation is called Help, I Need Somebody, Assisted Migration of Buck Island Ranch Wetland Plant Species. So,
thank you, Betsy, for that great introduction. Well, welcome everyone. Great.
Make sure your camera get me up. There you go.
Thank you. All right. Wetlands perform valuable functions throughout the world. Many different forms, including ecosystem services such as carbon storage, biodiversity conservation, fish production, fuel, ecosystem services such as carbon storage, production, water purification, flood and shoreline protection, and erosion control. Wetlands can be among the most productive ecosystems globally and a refuge for a third of the threatened U.S. species. Due to the ecosystem services they provide, they can be valued at $9,000 per acre per year, and yet they're being lost at 3 times the rate of forests. Research has found that restored wetlands did not reach conditions found in natural reference wetlands, even a century post-restoration. During the restoration of South Marsh and East Marsh in 2007 on Buck Island Ranch, plant diversity increased in South Marsh and somewhat in East Marsh in the restored 3,000 acres. Still, some species are still absent in wetlands, specifically in South Marsh. To improve restoration success, it is important to understand why the major determinants that are affecting wetland species from establishment and why species are absent. Up here, we've got East Marsh in the right-hand corner, South Marsh in the bottom. These are going to be the 2 focal points of my project. Archbold Buck Island Ranch has 2 major land uses or pasture types. Improved pastures dominated by bahia grass, fertilizer and lime applied occasionally, and semi-native pastures area mix of native and non-native grasses, and no soil amendments and less ditches. Past research has found that wetlands embedded in improved pastures have lower plant species richness and diversity. Several plant species are found primarily in semi-native pasture wetlands and are missing from wetlands in improved pastures. And understanding why is important for wetland restoration. So the purple here is all improved pasture, and then the green is all the semi-native pasture on the ranch. And this is a fantastic aerial photo of improved pasture on the left and all semi-native on the right. You can see the vegetation differences from there. Of all the major determinants of wetland plant establishment, I'm focusing on interspecific competition where dominant species can suppress others via shading or root competition, flooding regimes where periodic inundation can favor flood-tolerant species, and soil type which affects root penetration and water retention. My research question was, what are the major drivers limiting species establishment in seasonal wetlands undergoing restoration in ranch landscapes? My hypotheses were if soil type is a major driver of establishment, we will see difference in transplant success among soil types. If hydrology is a major driver of establishment, we will see differences in transplant success along the hydrological gradient. If competition is a major driver of establishment, we will see differences in transplant success when competition is decreased. And finally, if pasture type is a major driver of establishment, we will see differences in transplant success among pasture types. First species were selected that had a known patchy distribution throughout the ranch and found in semi-native wetlands in East Marsh. The goal was to transplant species into areas where they are not commonly found to understand what might be limiting their establishment in other wetlands. The first species I chose was Justicia augusta, commonly known as Everglades water willow. It is a growth habit of before the plant reaches a max height of around 1 foot tall. It is dormant during the winter months and flowers in the spring to fall. The flowers are bisexual and are usually self-pollinated. It reproduces rhizomously as well as by seed dispersal. My second species, Amphocarpum mollenbergium, or commonly known as blue maiden cane, has a graminoid growth habit and grows to the size of 1 to 3 feet in size. It flowers and fruits in August through October. The above ground florets are sterile and the below ground florets are fertile. The species reproduces rhizomously and with subterranean florets. And right here is a picture of some subterranean florets. I've tried to find them myself. I have not succeeded so far. The third species is Tharia geminatum, known as Egyptian panic grass. It has a graminoid growth habit and grows 12 to 47 inches tall, flowers during the wet season, and reproduces by seed and rhizomously. My soils of interest are an alpha-sol feldal fine sand, poorly drained soils that formed in sandy and loam marine deposits, a histosol gator muck, that's poorly drained organic soils formed from thick beds of hydrophytic plant remains, and a mollisol choby fine sandy loam. It's depressional, very poorly drained soils that formed in thick beds of loamy marine sediments, and septisol placid fine sand, depressional environments found in and very poorly drained. I collected soil from 3 different locations on the ranch. The first wetland I collected from was my alpha salt control wetland, located in East Marsh. Other 2 wetlands I collected from were a histosol wetland in South Marsh and an alpha salt wetland in South Marsh. In total, I potted 162 pots with 54 pots of soil from each location. This slide shows a close-up of my soil maps for each of the 9 different wetlands, including my control. On the left, we have my control wetland, and we have the mollisol, septisol, and then this one has the 3 histosol wetlands in the purple, and then my 3 alpha-sol wetlands in the salmon color. I did plant on the eastern side of this wetland to make sure I got the alpha-sol soils. I collected all my plants from wetland 188 in South Marsh and planted them in 3 different soil types in pots. They proceeded to grow out, and I proceeded to grow out the plants in the shade house for 1 month before I planted them in the field again. During this time that I had a little trouble keeping the Justicia Augusta alive. I had to keep the Justicia submerged in buckets of water in order to keep them alive. That's why they're here in these buckets. I also watered them every morning at like 7 a.m. for just a couple minutes with the automated irrigation system. Here you can see a layout of all the wetlands throughout the ranch with the LiDAR map. And I'd like to specifically point out my alpha sol control. It's also my donor site for all my plants. And it has a beautiful gradient that you can see in the LiDAR. The outer ring is the Amphicarpum mollembergia. That's where it would grow. The second closer ring inside was where the Setaria geminata would grow. And then on the inside here is where the Justicia Augusta would grow. So I thought that was pretty cool that it showed up on the LiDAR map. My planting layout in each of my wetlands consisted of 2 cages at each of my 3 gradient levels, a wet, medium, and a dry gradient. Cages excluded grazing from my experiment, which was found to be not a factor when looking at diversity in previous studies in East and South Marsh. In one set of each of the cages at each gradient level, I clipped all the plants before planting my 3 species to eliminate competition. And on the right here, you can see a cage with competition. And on the bottom here, you can see one where I clipped it. After I grew out the plants in the shade house for 1 month, I planted them in the fields. And I took data on the initial planting day and every 2 weeks after for 3 months from January to March. Took data on survival, plant height, basal diameter, number of leaves, number of stems, and the soil moisture for each plant. These guys helped me plant one of my wetlands, my control. They wanted to eat all my plants, and even the soil moisture probe wire made it a little bit more difficult. For my statistical analysis, I used the linear models to test the differences in moisture between the wetlands, pasture types, and soil types, as well as the differences in plant heights, number of stems, number of leaves, and diameter on day 1 and after 3 months. The moisture percentage in all 3 different gradient levels had a significant difference marked by the graph on the left. And the graph on the right shows that there was no significant difference between the improved pasture wetlands and the semi-native pasture wetlands when it came to moisture type or moisture. There also was no significant difference for moisture between the different soil types. It is important to note out that this study, soil types differed by pasture types. So all my semi-native soil types were the alpha sol control, the alpha sol and hisisol, and my inceptisol and mollisol were improved soil types or pastures. On the initial day 1, I compared all the measurements to make sure that there was no one species or wetland that had a significant advantage. There was no significant difference between the plant height, number of stems, number of leaves, compared to the moisture gradients, soil types, and pasture types. All these pictures show the 3 different species on the first week of planting. I got Justicia, Setaria geminata, and Amphicarpum mollembergia. I initially planted 162 plants in total and 54 of each species. 157 survived and 2 Amphicarpum mollembergia died and 3 Justicia augusta died. One of the Justicia was dug out by some animal. Justicia augusta over the 3 months grew larger in the improved pasture versus the semi-native, as well as grew taller in the inceptisol and mollisol soil types. Within the semi-native soil types, the plant growth did not differ. Justicia augusta grew significantly taller in the wet gradient level compared to the medium and dry gradient level. Amphicarpum mollembergium saw significantly taller growth in subsol and mollisol soils, as well as significantly more leaves in the mollisol compared to the other 4 soil types. Within the semi-native soil types, plant growth did not differ. Amphicarpum mollembergium saw a significant increase in plant height and increased amount of leaves in the improved pasture versus the semi-native pastures. These graphs show that Setaria geminata grew tallest and had a larger stem growth in mollisols versus other soil types, and within semi-native soil types, plant growth did not differ. Setaria geminata grew similarly in all soil types, except it had a greater change in leaves in mollisols. Septisols and mollisols did not have a significant difference. Setaria geminata had a significantly increased plant height and more leaves in improved pasture versus semi-native pastures. Conclusions, Justitia augusta grew taller in septisol and mollisol soils correlated with improved pasture wetlands, preferred the highest moisture gradient sites. Amphicarpum mollembergium grew taller in septisol and mollisol soils, produced more leaves in mollisol soils, grew taller and produced more leaves in improved pasture. Setaria geminata grew taller in histosol and septisol and mollisol soils, produced more leaves and stems in mollisol soils, and grew taller and produced more leaves in improved pasture. For my first hypothesis, I found that within the semi-native pastures, soil type is not a driver of establishment. Plants grew better in septisols and mollisols, but both of those were also improved pasture. For my second hypothesis, hydrology is a driver of establishment for Justitia and Augusta, not for the other 2 species. And for the third hypothesis, there was no difference between plots with competition and without competition. Finally, I found that all plants grew better in improved pasture wetlands. We need to further study to understand if this is driven by soil types or other factors such as nutrient content. It was surprising to see this result because these species are largely absent in plant surveys of improved pasture wetlands. I observed high survival and growth of transplant species. This suggests that plant absence from restored wetlands or improved pasture wetlands may be due to dispersal limitation. Indicates that active restoration through seeding or planting is needed. Hydrology was a major driver of Justitia augusta, indicates need for understanding the hydrological differences among wetlands to guide restoration plans. Within the semi-native wetlands, soil type did not affect wetland plant establishment. However, we found that plants grew better in improved pasture wetlands that had mollisols and septisols. Further study is needed to test out the effect of pasture type in these soil types. My references. And thank you. Thank you to the LTAR network and to Archfold. Thank you to the Agroecology Lab. This has been one of the best experiences of my life. Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, that was a ton of data. I was curious, it looked like you had cages on these, but I was wondering if you could speak to whether like cattle grazing could be one thing that keeps them out of the improved pastures.
Like keeping them out of the improved pasture?
Or yeah, the improved, like if cattle are just like munching them, they just, for those species, they just can't make it for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, they've done seed bank studies as well, and the plants are just not in the seed bank as well. So they're just not present there in the improved pasture areas. So, yeah. But they'll grow there. They love, they grow there better than semi-native.
How do you think the plants disperse? Like, do you know the disperse? Have you thought about like how they disperse and why they would be dispersal limited?
So when I was driving around South Marsh looking for wetlands that had an ideal wetland gradient, I tested a lot of wetlands, some that had ditches flowing to some of the wetlands. And I did find some of the species in the very like outskirts of South Marsh. So on the very edges, there's some wetlands that have some of the species present, Setaria geminata and Amphicarpa mollembergia, and there's a wetland way over here that does have just Justicia augusta. But there's also ditches flowing into these wetlands, and I believe that's how they could be migrating to some of those wetlands. Yeah, I didn't find any wetlands in here that had any of my 3 species. So they do seem to rhizominously spread primarily. Betsy.
Do they do liming of the improved pastures? And if so, that could affect pH, and I just wondered if that might also affect, or how do you think, if that's the thing, it could have affected your results?
I know they used to, I don't know if they still do.
They do occasionally.
Occasionally,
Yeah,
okay.
not every year, but the pH is higher, like more neutral in the improved pasture wetlands.
So would that actually help or hurt the species that you looked at, I wonder?
I'm not sure, I can't speak to that, yeah.
So did I understand correctly that these plants seem to be doing fine in improved pasture, but they're not very common in improved pasture, right?
Yeah, like
But
hardly any at
yeah,
all.
but at the same time, you didn't find effects of competition. So do you think it's just like the ghost of a competitor's past?
It could be, there has been talk of like when they created the improved pasture, they scraped the land bare supposedly. I've not read it personally. So they could have just scraped the entire seed bank off and there's just no remnants of
Right.
those seeds being left.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea of how many years the seeds will be viable, the seed bank?
I don't. Yeah.
Because I had a connected question, so it's about dispersal again. So if you look at the historical pre-drainage past, right? So you had longer hydro periods, more, hydrologic connectivity. Now it's of course 5 ditches. But as the wetland gets restored again, I guess as the hydro period goes up, so there might be more chance for the seeds to move around. But I guess the result from this experiment shows that if you would actually plant them, that would like catalyze the introduction of these, reintroduction of these communities to the.
Yeah, especially Amphicarpa mollembergia, I think it's a great species to be seeded in, especially around the wetlands, because it reproduces rhizominously and through the subterranean florets. The florets above ground are sterile, so the cow can eat that as much as it wants and it's still going to reproduce. So great species to reseed into improved pastures specifically.
I think you'd introduce them using seeds or transplants, or what would be the most effective way to do that?
Seed probably for the grass species. Justicia augusta, possibly plugs, but you would have to verify that the wetland, I think, stays wet almost all year long for the hydro period. Yeah, it did survive on the outskirts of the wetland. I don't know how long it's gonna last. They were all alive when I finished taking data, but yeah.
Why do you think the Justicia seem to respond to the moisture treatment more than the other two species?
It's, when I collected it, it's found in the wettest part of the wetland. My donor wetland, was flooded the entire 3 months, except the final week, when all of my other wetlands dried up. So I think that speaks to, it loves a lot of moisture. And Justicia augusta was found floating. It likes to float in the flooded areas of the wetland as well. So